Good morning.
Good morning.
My name is Sarah, and I work with the Living Archives Project, where we are collecting stories of how COVID-19 impacted various communities in Charlotte-Mecklenburg County. Today is March 30th, 2023, and this week there were 58 reported cases of COVID-19 in the Charlotte-Mecklenburg County area, which shows a 20% decrease over the last 2 weeks. Therefore, each subject is comfortable not wearing a mask today. Wendolyn, would you introduce yourself?
Of course, my name is Wendolyn Fernandez. I identify as Latina. My family is from Dominican Republic. I am first-gen immigrant. Today, I have my hair in a bun, and I am wearing a greenish blazer with some jeans and like a leotard, I guess, onesie kind of thing. I don't even know what you call it.
Well, I love it. You look lovely today.
Thank you.
Yes, I love your earrings in
Thank
particular. Those are very nice. So you're first generation.
Yes.
So tell me, that means you were born here, correct?
I was born in Dominican Republic.
Oh, you were born in Dominican
Yes.
Republic. Okay. So when did you move to the States?
I was 2, so it feels almost like a cheat when I say I'm an immigrant, because I don't have the experiences of living in another country, but I still identify as an immigrant because I still had all the things that you experience of having immigrant parents who live in this country.
Yeah. So did your parents come to North Carolina, or did they move to a different state?
No, we actually moved to New York first, which is like every Dominican in the world. And then they probably stayed there no more than 2 years.
Okay.
They didn't like the hustle and bustle of New York, and they were both from like very small towns in Dominican Republic. And so we ended up going to Rhode Island, and that's where I was raised.
Okay. And so you were there until
14.
14.
Yeah.
And then, so I guess the question is, when did you come to Mecklenburg County, Charlotte area?
So I love long stories. So I'll shorten them though.
No, please. Long stories are great.
We were leaving Rhode Island. My family, when they all moved here, they got into trucking. All the males did.
Okay.
Specifically working for Goya. And my father just got so tired of being in the cold because, you're getting up at 4 a.m. and then you're out there moving things around and it's freezing. And, it's New England.
Yeah.
So we ended up moving to Florida, and our family was supposed to follow because my mom's family especially is very family-centric, and we all follow each other. So when we moved to Rhode Island, everyone moved to Rhode Island. Like, we were all within, 10 minutes from each other. The farthest person's probably 20. And so people started slowly coming to Florida to follow us, but they waited too long. Within a year, our house had increased severely, kind of like what's going on in Charlotte. And by the time we left, which we only stayed in 2 years, our house was at least double what we paid for.
Wow.
So they couldn't come. My family, most of them are very poor. They couldn't make it to Florida. But on the way to Florida, because we normally drive, being that everyone's truckers, everyone just we drive everywhere. So on the way to Florida, someone ended up in North Carolina, really loved it, and moved there. So, of course, we followed. When everyone couldn't follow us to Florida, we followed to North Carolina. And so I've been here since I was 16.
Wow. So that's how you came to North Carolina. I love that. So does that mean predominantly your family still lives?
So we're like half and half now.
Okay.
We actually, most of us who came to North Carolina moved to Monroe, North Carolina, which at the time, this is 15-ish years ago, it was pretty rural. This was 2016, so I don't know the timing, but it was pretty rural at the time. And so not that Rhode Island is huge, but it's very close to Boston. It's very close to New York. And so when my family would come visit, they just thought North Carolina was too boring. And they used to call Charlotte the Sleepy City. Because it's, there wasn't much going on at the time. And so half of them stayed up in Rhode Island, and then a good chunk of us stayed here. But as people are retiring, because my mom's the youngest of 11, so as her siblings are retiring, more people are actually going back to Dominican Republic to live out their last couple of years.
That is, I don't hear that often. That's amazing. Wow. So your parents still live in the area, though?
My mother does. My dad lives back in Rhode Island now.
Okay. Wow, so cool. And are you your mom has 11 siblings, so do you have a lot of siblings?
I only have 2 brothers.
Okay, great. That's kind of like me. My mom's the youngest of 11 as well, but I'm actually the youngest of 6. So I'm kind of larger. They're smaller than her, but larger than 3.
Yeah.
So that's great. So tell me a little bit about your experience in Charlotte. How did you like growing up here from, Monroe to Charlotte since you're 16?
Yeah. Monroe I did not enjoy like that. It was just so small. I felt so small. But I ended up going to UNCC for college. So I've been like Charlotte local since I was 18. And I love Charlotte. I mean, there have been times I've thought of leaving just because I've been here for so long, and sometimes you just wonder, like, should I go somewhere else? But there's just something about the city that it just keeps me here. And I think one of the special things about being here for so long is seeing all the changes. And so an area like University, being that I went to college at UNCC, I know what that looked like, so many years ago. And now I go visit it, and the light rail's there, which did not exist when I was going to school. Or they have a football field, which, because I took some time off in the middle of my schooling, it ended up getting finished my last year that I graduated from undergrad. And so it's just really cool to see all those like little changes, or go to certain neighborhoods and think like, this is so new, or like they've really revamped it. So I love Charlotte. I feel like it's constantly changing, and it doesn't have like its niche yet. And so it's interesting seeing it kind of develop, because I'm really hoping it's more leaning towards the arts, and I'm like hoping we'll like really focus on that. And it looks, we try to do a lot of things kind of leaning towards that way. So I feel like it's really progressive, and there's always something about the city that's changing and trying to just grow and adapt.
I love that. Thank you for sharing that. So tell me a little bit about your current season. What has the last 2-3 years been like for you? Tell us where you're at.
So the last 2 or 3 years, a lot has been focused on like self-development.
Okay.
I would say like from like the start of the pandemic, I was in education, and at the time I knew I didn't want to do that anymore, and I was really lost in what that looked like. I also was really lost in like my identity with Latinidad, because in Rhode Island, you wouldn't think this, but Rhode Island has a lot of Dominicans. Okay. And so when I left it and I went to Florida, there were still at least a lot of Latinos. And then when I went to move to Monroe, there was no one. And even in Charlotte, there's Latinos around, but they're not Caribbean. And so there's always like this like desire I've always had of like connecting with people, because I don't necessarily feel like I have that anymore. And so, I was trying to figure that out, and just, so it was a lot about figuring out who I was. I felt kind of lost. Yeah. And so I've been just doing lots of different things to feel like I know myself more. Mm-hmm. I became one of those people that like got really obsessed with TikTok.
Okay, I love it.
And so as I like start scrolling through all the videos, just like learning so much about myself, especially like I have ADHD. And so just learning about like what that means and like how I present, and I don't like taking medication. So like, how do I, navigate the world through, this neurological thing, and making sure that I don't always like act too frazzled, because sometimes I can be that. And so just trying to do all the things to better myself and know myself more.
Okay. So what are some ways that you kind of dug into knowing yourself? Like, what are some practices that you've done?
So with my Latinidad, I ended up joining this group. It's called, oh my gosh, I forget the name right now. Oh, they're going to kill me because I'm like the worst with names. Oh my gosh. Oh my God. Charlotte, can I look it up?
Yes.
I'm so sorry. Because I should know it, and of course I blanked. And they're gonna be like, Wendolyn, how could you? I just talked to someone today about it, which is the crazy thing. And the name is so easy. Oh my God, Latinx Ed. Oh my gosh.
Okay.
So I joined this fellowship program called Latinx Ed, and it's completely based in North Carolina. And the point of the fellowship is to talk to educators and nonprofit workers who, work with students that are Latino and just explain our experiences. And so it's a cool, experience because I got to meet a lot of Latinos who are in similar fields as me, and we just got to share our experience. And usually, I would say my last 10 years of work, I have been in like a silo when it comes to like people who look like me who are doing similar work. So it's just really cool to talk to other people who had those experiences. And because I was raised by immigrant parents, but I was raised in the US, and there's always this like fear of like I'm not enough. Like I even have like a Spanish accent, even though my parents are bilingual and I'm bilingual, but like I renounced it for so long that I ended up getting an accent with it. And so there was a lot of shame in how I was presenting, and especially because most people deal with like stereotypes when they see you. For a long time, when people would say like, what are you? Or tell me about yourself, I didn't even like to identify as Latina because it just felt like that's going to come with its own waves of problems of what people assume that means about me. So it was the first time I also got to be around a lot of people who felt that way and who were open about those experiences, which was something I could never probably replicate ever again because it's hard to get that. We just don't have enough, I think, Latinos in North Carolina, unfortunately, in areas where we are, we're taking lead, we're in leadership positions. Like, it's just not that many of us yet. So hopefully the future won't feel that way. But so that was one way. I started also like deep diving into like self-help stuff. So like really looking into like learning things. Like I love doing personality tests. So like doing like the Enneagram, doing like the Myers-Briggs, and like figuring out what that means about me and like ways that maybe I present or things that I do based on like those characteristics. And just watching a lot of like videos and getting like news sources about things and trying to figure out, like with my ADHD, like figuring out like what that means to be like a woman, how it presents differently and things like that. So like just lots of researching online and getting information that way.
Yeah. I can totally connect with what you're saying, especially, so I'm a daughter of immigrants as well. My sisters were born in Romania and I was born in the US though. And it's so interesting when growing up when people would say, well, what are you? When Americans would ask me, I'm Romanian. Yeah. But when Romanians would ask me, I'm American. And I'm like, man, it took years to really identify who am I and who do I want to be? Yeah. Where does my culture, because like you, I grew up in a heavily, like, very culturally Romanian family, but in the U.S. And so it's so interesting how, you have to go about really finding out, like, who do you want to be and connecting with others who may have similar experiences and may not either. And how do you figure out who you are? Yeah. I love that. Thank you for sharing that. So tell me a little bit, you mentioned you were in education during the height of the pandemic. So this is early 2020. Does that mean you were a teacher? Were you in administration? What were you?
So I had just left the classroom the year prior. I was an elementary school teacher for 6 years. Wow. And I went to become a high school administrator. So at the time, I was in high school as a dean of students.
Okay. And so you were the dean of students in high school, and then all of this happened. The lockdown. Students were probably told you're going to be going home for 1 or 2 weeks and come back, but they never came back. No. So what was that like?
It was so weird because our last day of school that we got to all be in person was a fun day. Like, it was the end of our like spirit week, and we just had like a faculty staff basketball game that I had played in, and so it was really high energy. And then they were like, everyone grab your stuff. Like, we might come back, but we might not. Just like be prepared just in case. So we all grabbed our things thinking like, whatever, no big deal. We were all just together in this one space and, high school gym. So like everyone really crammed together. And then we get an email probably just saying like, you're not coming back. and then we couldn't come back. And even though I was in, the admin team, because no one really understood what was going on, at first we couldn't come back either, which later on changed because we came back before teachers. But for me, it was really weird because most of my job, if I wasn't doing paperwork, because a lot of my role had to do with like making sure, people's credentials and stuff were fine. But if I wasn't doing the paperwork side, most of my job was being in the classroom, observing teachers and giving them feedback. But now people are teaching online and no one knows how to work it. And so I was just really lost in like, what do I do day to day? But so were teachers, because it was like, how do I teach? And everyone was just so confused in how everything worked. And then we also have high schoolers trying to get them online was really difficult. Trying to get them to buy into what we were trying to do was really difficult. So it was just lots of confusion and lots of misinformation going around about when we're going to come back. And of course, people stressing out because you're now about to miss prom and you're about to miss your graduation. And those were really difficult things to try to navigate and do it in a way that felt safe, but also where people still got to have somewhat that experience. Yeah. So like we did have like a drive-through graduation to make sure that they still got to have that experience.
Tell me what a drive-through graduation is.
So you are in your vehicle, and then your high school parking lots are really big. So you get in your car, your family's there, everyone decorates the car and everything. Aww. And then when you get to the end, the principal's there's a small stage that's decorated, and everyone had to stay masked, but they got their picture with the principal, okay. They got their diploma. Parents could take pictures from outside the car, but we had a photographer take pictures so that way they can have some nicer ones up close, and that was pretty much it. So everyone was kind of very quick in and out. And we had some staff that held up like congratulation banners and stuff, and we're just kind of on the sidelines and waving them out.
Beautiful. Yeah. Wow, that's amazing that you guys were able to really adapt to kind of what was happening and do something so creative that still is meaningful. Mm-hmm. I bet the students will always remember that, even though it's unfortunate they didn't have the real graduation, but a drive-through graduation, that's pretty fun. I mean, I think I would remember that. But so tell me a little bit about, you did the graduation, then summer, and then now the fall comes around. Mm-hmm. Did you guys, from my understanding, you guys weren't in person still?
No, we weren't. So when the fall came, people were still remote, but now sometime in the fall is when admin had to start coming back to work. And it wasn't full-time yet because there's no one in the school. But we did slowly start coming back more and more. I specifically, like one of my new roles was now like doing the PDP. Okay. And so a lot of my job was now setting up the school and getting it ready. So like putting all of the like the new posters up about like, washing your hands and masking up and being 6 feet, putting up things on the floor to make sure that places that people would line up, like the cafeteria, there were markers of what 6 feet actually was, so people could actually maintain that safe distance. And so a lot of my responsibility during that time was just getting the school prepared for when kids would come in, which we still weren't sure when that would happen, but we just had to make sure we were ready for it.
Okay, that makes sense. And so how long... I know you said you did transition out of education. Mm-hmm. And so how long were you in education, and then when did you transition? So
that second, that next school year, I probably started looking for new work around January. Okay. So by then the kids were back in school, and things just got really ugly, honestly. Mm-hmm. Parents were being really rude about, people were just tired of it. At first, people were really happy that, about teachers. It was like, we love you, you do great work, you're the heroes. And it was really beautiful to hear and see because, so often in education feel underappreciated. Yeah. And then it became, teachers are lazy, they don't want to come back, and you just want to be on the computer all day at home, and the narrative changed very quickly because families no longer wanted to be at home, especially in a high school level. if a student wasn't on, or if a student was like in the bed with the sheets blocking their heads, teachers would take pictures and send it to their parents and say, hey, can you check in on your kid? And then we'd get backlash of, I don't know what to do with this kid. And so it started becoming kind of ugly in that way. There was also some race stuff kind of happening that made that period really hard. A lot of conversations about like what's appropriate to talk to students when it comes to topics like LGBTQ or religion or, whiteness and what it means to have certain things. Like when we say like racism, what does that mean? When we say that there's the Black and brown people have certain things that they don't, certain privileges that they don't have, that they're not born with, like those kind of conversations became really sticky. I was working at one of the largest public high schools in North Carolina, and it was also one of the, like as far as wealth goes, it was one of the even though it's a public high school, it was one of the wealthiest with the people who lived around there. But not everyone identified as that, and even though most of the families were white, because the high school was so big, we probably still had 500 students who were Black specifically, and then you have other races in there, and so it was just really weird and sticky. And so I knew I wanted to leave around January because of how everything that we were talking about was just now being presented so negatively. And that's when I started like really job searching and figuring out what does it mean to leave education, especially because when you go into education, no one teaches you what you can do after if you don't want to be there anymore. So it took me a couple months to kind of figure out what that would look like.
Okay, so what did you figure out?
So I got into nonprofit work by accident. So I was really lost, but I knew what I did not want. And so what my boyfriend ended up doing, he works in marketing and branding. He helped me just transform my LinkedIn. And so instead of talking about like, what do I do and things like that, like your normal like job description, it was more so like my beliefs, what I believe about education system, what do I believe about working with children. And it ended up getting the attention of one of my current coworkers from Urban Promise, who was looking for a literacy teacher. And because I was already working, she was like, hey, I just need someone part-time for the summer. I looked into the job and I was like, that sounds really great. I'm actually looking for a full-time job, though, and I see you guys have some stuff. And so we started talking. I learned more about the role. It reminded me of something that I attended in Rhode Island that was very similar, just, high schoolers teaching younger kids, and that was really impactful for me when I was a kid. So I was like, this sounds exactly like something I want to do.
Yeah.
And so I found it by accident, just fixing my LinkedIn, basically.
That's amazing. And so how has that transition been for you? And so how has that transition been for you?
It was really healing. When it came to working for the school system, there's a lot of guilt that I think people feel often. Like one of them is like taking time off work. Like anytime I had to take off time, be it personal or like even like a wellness day. Like if I wanted like a day just to myself, the narrative was that you're being selfish, right? Because you have to be in it for the kids. And so for a really long time, I couldn't do things like that. Like I felt so much guilt with like taking time off or worrying about myself. And so my current job is really great about like the idea of like work-life balance. And so a lot of my conversations with my boss were healing and helping me understand like you have to do certain things for yourself. It's also a Christian organization, and it's like more liberal Christian. And so it also helped me as far as like my journey into like being more vocal about being Christian, but also like being vocal about it because usually people think of Christian one way in the South, because we think of, the stereotype of like people being more closed off, whereas I consider myself a very progressive Christian and like very open to all people, and it's just kind of like you can believe what you believe. I have my thoughts, but like just love everyone and be kind. And it was really affirming to be in an organization where everyone kind of felt the same way. And it wasn't even though we're a Christian nonprofit, like I had high schoolers who did not identify as Christian who still worked in our organization and felt just as comfortable as anyone else. So it wasn't like we were pushing things on people. It was just like, just be kind, like Jesus said, and we'll all be happy, kind of thing.
That's beautiful. So with your work with Urban Promise, how have you seen the students kind of, because I'm assuming, you know, now that the restrictions have been lifted mostly, you know, and there's just a lot more freedom, how have the students responded to that?
I mean, it's almost like it's gone away in a sense. Like I started Urban Promise back in like May, like the very beginning of May. So I didn't finish out my year, my second year as a administrator. So we ended up throwing like a prom for them, for the seniors at Urban Promise. And it was still back when not everyone was doing prom. And because we're working with kids from Title I schools, these were the schools that obviously weren't doing them. And so we like threw them an outside prom, and it was really fun and really quaint and really small. And those kids really appreciated it. But like the next year, like everything was kind of back to normal, you know, and like now they're planning on going to prom. And, you know, I currently have seniors right now showing me their dresses and their shoes, and they're really excited, and I'm excited for them. But it's so night and day of where people, you know, where that same group of kids were a year ago. Because even things like, you know, the mask restrictions, for a long time we were still wearing them, and then it no longer became something that we had to wear, and then you slowly see people not wearing them and people wearing them, and now usually people just wear it if they're not feeling well. And so it's less of, now it's more normalized just to think of things being like how they used to be. And every once in a while you have like a sprinkle to remind you that like a pandemic did happen, and it still is kind of around. Yeah.
Working with teens still, you know, as you transition from education into, well, you're still doing education, just from public school into nonprofit work. Do you find that now the students you work with, are they able to talk about racial topics or social justice or anything like that? Or is it still a difficult topic?
So we work with kids who are usually Black and brown, just because of the schools that they're in. And so we do have conversations about it. So on Fridays, we do a lot of training for the teenagers, and we get to train them in whatever we want. Like sometimes it's like professional development on like teaching strategies, and recently I've been like teaching them about like all these different cultures. So we talked about like Native Americans, and we talked about Latinidad, and we talked about Black history. And so we're talking about things like, you know, when we were talking about Black history, we were talking about how there's places like in Lake Norman that used to be like Black towns and are no longer that because they put a lake there, and how the same thing happened in Central Park. Or we talked about how there's things such as sundown towns. And it was interesting to see how some of them were aware of those things because they had AP classes that talked about those topics, and others had no knowledge of it. And their knowledge was like on the more surface level things that we always kind of talk about. So no one's against talking about it, but everyone is in a different place as far as their understanding of, you know, social justice and what it means, especially when it's not your own. Like we talked about immigration, and that was new for so many of them because there's only a couple of our teens from my site that are immigrants, and so they had a lot of knowledge based on firsthand experiences, but others had no knowledge of the immigration system or even how unfair it could be.
Yeah, for sure. Well, thank you for sharing, and thank you for the amazing work that you are doing at Urban Promise, and just truly building up the next generation, because that's what you guys are doing, and that's amazing.
Thank you.
We really appreciate all your sacrifices.
Thank you.
So at the beginning, before we started the recording, we did this activity together called a hand map. Is there anything, Wendolyn, from your hand map that you want to share with us today?
Let's see. I would say, for me, like at the bottom of the hand map, we put like things about COVID-19 that I thought of. And so the three things I put were worry for family, bonding, and free time. And I I want to talk about that because I feel like my experience is different from other people's in certain ways, being that like when the pandemic started, I was living in an affluent part of Charlotte, which is South Park. Okay. And so at that time, I very much became like the stereotypical person who lives in South Park. And like, I bought a bike and I was out riding my bike in Charlotte, and I was living with my boyfriend, and we were doing the things that like people imagine of like, you know, like affluent families doing. Like it wasn't like our lives changed in this very drastic, horrible way. We were kind of being separate from people, but that's about it. We still found ways to have fun because we were in a space that allowed it. We were right by the park. I mean, like there was a lot of freedom there, which is why I said like bonding and free time. But like my mother, for example, she worked, at the time she was working for Wingate University, and she was in the cleaning staff. And so they lost she didn't lose her job, it was just like on pause. Yeah. And this idea of like, well, are we going back to work? Mm-hmm. And so she also had the free time because when the kids couldn't go to school, now she also was on pause and receiving some of the relief money. So not worried so much about pay right now, but wondering how long it would last. But her free time looked different because it was more fear-based of, will I still have a job? And what's it going to look like if, you know, the kids don't come back to school? But because teaching and administration, in that sense, I always felt like I would have a job no matter what. Mm-hmm. So I was more worry-free. So while I'm like using my free time to enjoy and discover the city more, my mother's free time was, I need to start job hunting. I need to see what else is out there just in case, you know, this goes away. Yeah, that's huge. Yeah. You also mentioned at the beginning that, you know, you have some family living in Rhode Island, some family back in the Dominican Republic, and then some family here. You know, as you connected with your family over the last 3 years, did you find that your experiences varied depending on location? Absolutely. My family in Rhode Island, most of them are, like I'm one of the first in my family to go to college. And I'm honestly, my family's very large, my extended family, but I'm one of a handful that went to college. Okay. And so a lot of my Rhode Island family were doing, you know, they were making speculations like, should I take the vaccine? Is the government trying to do things to us? And so a lot of my conversations with them were more frustration based, and several family members in Rhode Island ended up getting COVID from still gathering together back when they were still telling people to separate. Whereas my family here, you know, my brothers live here, my mother lives here, we were all still separate from each other. We weren't getting together until we all finally agreed to not see anyone outside of our actual like nuclear family. And so that way we wouldn't be, you know, everyone was kind of working at home. And so there was like 6 of us getting together. And so we weren't meeting with others, but they were getting together in droves. So our conversations were a lot different because we were being really educated. We were like learning about what's going on, having conversations. We all worked in fields where we're working, you know, a lot with people, or like, you know, my brothers are in banking. So like it's a lot of like knowledge-based careers where our conversations were just different than our family in Rhode Island. And then my family in Dominican Republic, you know, it's a developing country. And so they had strict lockdowns because it's tourist based. And so like you have people who are relying on tourism, but then you have, you know, these poor families who are living on top of each other who are getting sick constantly. And so they were having police raid the streets after a certain time. And if you were out, you can be sent to jail. And when things even calmed down, because my grandparents ended up having their 60th anniversary last year. So that was 2022. So still, you know, during a time when it's still around there, and like people still like aren't completely back to normal. So when they had their 60th anniversary, we went to Rhode Island. You would still see the police kind of not stopping people anymore at night and putting them out, but just kind of letting them know we're still monitoring. Like you still have to, you know, be like worried about the fact that this still does exist because, and I don't know, I don't have enough knowledge to know if people just aren't getting vaccinated or how that works there, but I know that it's not the same experience that we had here, as far as like feeling the freedom of like, oh, I'm vaccinated and now I can start going out to public gatherings and feeling safe.
Yeah, that makes sense. Is there anything else from your handout that you wanted to share with us? And if not, no worries.
I feel like, I did get a dog during, I was one of those people that got a dog during the pandemic.
Good.
So I put like my dog was one of my things. It was just, I just love my dog so much.
What kind of dog did you get?
A golden doodle.
Oh my goodness. A boy or a girl?
A boy.
A boy. Oh, I bet he's so cute.
Yeah, his name is Huey.
Huey. Oh, so cute, so cute. Anything else that you gained over the last 2-3 years?
I just feel like I just gained like self-expression in the last 2 years. Yeah. Especially with something like TikTok, which I know everyone has like their ideas on it, but for such a long time, because of my age, being a millennial, I've gotten to really see the internet become what it is today. Mm-hmm. And for such a long time, social media is just like this thing that you like post pictures on and show this illusion of what your life is. And like, I have a Facebook, I have an Instagram, I barely post on either because it just feels so scripted. And anyone who sees me on there, like, they don't really know anything about me. But I really ended up connecting with TikTok because I started seeing people like post the realities of life and like talk about like, like these are my struggles, these are my challenges, especially things like motherhood. Although I'm not a parent, my brother became a parent during the pandemic. His son is 6 months old right now. Oh. And so just seeing them kind of like experience, pregnancy and the struggles of like being a parent and the realities of like this is not easy and that not being discussed because especially like as Latinos we've always like have children, like that's the narrative, but no one talks about like the difficulties of like being a parent and how sacrificial it is, and you always have to now worry about something. But now I see a community that's being very honest about like, hey, like pregnancy is really hard and like parenting is really difficult, or like this other aspect of it, it's just so many things. Or like even like in relationships, I remember with my partner, like there were certain times like we would go through waves during the pandemic because we're stuck together all the time. So there were times where at first it was really fun, we're always together, and then there were times where it was like, this is really exhausting, we're together all the time, and like we had to learn how to have like certain conversations with each other, and it was just great to see people be more honest about it. I think before these last 2 to 3 years, I can't remember, because we've been together since I was 26 and I'm 32 now. So before the last 2 to 3 years, I don't remember ever having conversations with people about like, hey, this is something we're struggling with. How do you work through that? And in the last 2 to 3 years, we're very honest with people. And I would say that's across the board. Even with my friends, like if I'm going through something, like I've suffered with depression before, usually I kept it to myself. Now I'm like, hey, I'm like really struggling with this right now. It's just, I feel like people are just being more honest. Yeah. And I don't know if it started because of like people being more honest on the internet, and then, or if it's just because you had to be honest during the pandemic because it was just, the only way you could talk to people was through things like the phone and just having that kind of connection. But I feel like that's something I've really gained, that it feels like it'll last forever, that I'm really happy to have seen, that change.
That's beautiful. It's a shift in mindset and a shift in how we connect with each other in society. Yeah. And that's really beautiful, that, authenticity is critical for growth and for support and for mental health. Yeah. So thank you for sharing that. As we come to a close, and I want to respect and honor your time today, is there anything else that you want to share with us? Maybe a story or an experience over the last few years, or just anything you want to finish?
I guess it's interesting seeing Charlotte come back from this. Like, we starting tomorrow, actually, we're going to start having Charlotte Shout, which is a festival.
Yeah.
And it came back last year. And it was around before the pandemic and, took a 2-year hiatus and is back. But seeing things slowly come back to the city is just it's really fun to see, the small changes that they make. And then also, because the city has shifted so much, we're constantly getting new people. Just seeing how old things that we have had in the past are now being almost like modernized to fit like the people that we're currently getting in the city is just it's interesting to see. Like the growth of Charlotte these last couple of years especially is just, I don't think there's anything you can compare it to. We're just so fast paced and it changes so much of like how the city presents itself.
I love that. Well, thank you. Wendolyn, thank you for your time today. And thank you for sharing your beautiful story.
Thanks, Sarah.
I appreciate it.